The leader of Hong Kong's government defied calls that he stepped down today, and he put protesters on notice to stay away from key sites. But the pro-democracy crowd showed no sign they'd be cowed. Lucy Watson of Independent Television News spent the day among the protesters and filed this report.
There were moments of action and confusion, with emotions overrunning. How could they keep these streets under their control? It's authority versus youth, weapons against toys, and the tension is mounting.
The atmosphere is a bit more tense because we have observed that the government tried to move in some weapons or some tear gas into the headquarters.
But Napo Wong is here to keep the peace, yet isn't fearful of what this could bring.
After the first tear gas shoot us, I think the people do not afraid anymore, but they feel very angry. I think angry more than afraid.
The number of protesters camping out here is growing by the minute in a face-off with police, and that's because this government building is the office of the chief executive of Hong Kong, and what they don't want is for him to be able to come here to work tomorrow.
Because the man from the glass tower, C.Y. Leung, still won't resign. He does say he's now willing to talk. Yet if protesters invade this building, the consequences will be serious, and they will respond.
For a closer look at what's driving these young people to the streets, we turn to Dimitri Sevastopoulos, South China correspondent for the Financial Times. He's in Hong Kong, and I spoke to him a short time ago by Skype. Dimitri Sevastopoulos, thank you for joining us. Can you tell us how these incredible protests that we've seen spring up, these hundreds of thousands of people in the street, how do they spring up so quickly and so aggressively?
Well, students started boycotting classes and protesting last week. And at the end of the week on Friday, a couple of hundred students stormed an area outside one of the main government buildings in Hong Kong. A bunch of them were arrested, and that caused sympathy for the student movement and the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. On Sunday morning, a group called Occupy Central decided to launch a civil disobedience campaign, piggybacking on the back of the students' success in generating sympathy. And then over the past 5 days, you've had massive outpourings of support and huge numbers of people on the streets of Hong Kong doing what's been an incredibly peaceful protest. It's really been an amazing situation here.
It is a different kind of protest, no question. But what are they protesting? Are they protesting Beijing's strong hand when it comes to voting?
At the moment, they're protesting two things. The first thing is Beijing wants to implement universal suffrage, which everybody wants in Hong Kong. People at the moment cannot vote for their chief executive or top political leader. But Beijing has implemented tough restrictions, which mean that the public will have no role in nominating the candidates. And secondly, it is very difficult for anyone who is a critic of Beijing to get on the ballot. So the people say there's no point having universal suffrage if you're not given a genuine choice. The second thing they're fighting for at the moment is the resignation of the chief executive, C.Y. Leung. He's come under huge pressure, particularly since Sunday when he ordered his police to fire tear gas at peaceful demonstrators. That's really changed the dynamic. And so now, unless he goes, I think the students are not going to be satisfied.
Beijing is now talking about unimaginable consequences when it comes to pushing back on these kinds of protests. Do we know what that means?
Well, Beijing has said that they think Hong Kong can manage this and that the police in Hong Kong can handle the situation. But at the end of the day, if the Hong Kong police were unable to manage the protests, if they got so out of control that it was very difficult for them, it is conceivable that China might decide to send in PLA soldiers. I think it's very unlikely, but you can't rule it out completely.
They're talking about opening talks. What kind of talks are we talking about?
Well, the chief executive faced a midnight deadline for his resignation. The students said if he didn't do that today, that they would storm government buildings and occupy government buildings. As a way to try and ease the tensions, he gave some ground. He said we will have talks with the students, but he also said he wouldn't resign. So the talks is a way for the different groups, the protesters, the students, Occupy Central, to sit down with the government and see if they can reach some kind of a compromise. But I think very few people think that there's going to be any scope to do that.
Dimitri Sevastopoulos of the Financial Times from Hong Kong by Skype. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you.
In the day's other news, health officials in Texas now say as many as 100 people may have been exposed to an Ebola patient in Dallas. All had direct or indirect contact with Thomas Duncan after he arrived from Liberia last month. Meanwhile, some families have begun keeping children out of several schools. 5 students who attend those schools were exposed to Duncan. But Superintendent Mike Miles sought to reassure parents today.
We don't think there's any virus at any of those buildings, but we'll take that off the table. So we're doing extra cleaning and disinfecting. And now we're also enrolled the 5 students into the homebound program so that they will get curricular